Welcome to Teaching Truth. Indecent proposal. That's been the theme for our reflections this week as we've journeyed with Joseph through Genesis 39 and through his experience of being propositioned by Potiphar's wife to come to bed with me. As a result of that indecent proposal, Joseph said no. As a result of that indecent proposal, Joseph said no. And as a result of his saying no, Joseph was put into the king's prison. And notwithstanding the triumph which Joseph experienced in the fact that the Lord was still with him, we read that yesterday, the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in everything he did in prison. Nonetheless, he was put into prison. Being in prison in those days was not likely to be pleasant. Nothing has changed. Psalm 105 verse 18 captures the cruelty of Joseph's experience. He was held and would have been held initially like a caged animal. Quote, his feet were hurt with fetters. His neck was put in a collar of iron. And I'm sure as Joseph was put in prison and sitting in that prison cell, he could well have thought to himself as a young man, a young teenage fellow, has it actually all been worth it? Is it worth the bother and the hassle to be good? Could I not just have given in to Potiphar's wife and had that moment of ecstasy and pleasure with her? No. Because Joseph loved God, because Joseph was a man of integrity, because Joseph wished to protect his testimony, Joseph said no. But here's the reality, and here's where the rubber hits the road, folks. Being a Christian and saying no is not always easy. We may have to go, and often will have to go, through difficult and rough patches, prison-like experiences in our own life. I know of two people who have lost out on the chance of promotion and have been made redundant because they took a stand for the Lord. See, those who do the right thing, yes, God will honor them. That does not mean to say that in the brittle reality of life, things will be easy. And if anyone has taught you that the Christian life is a bed of roses and will be easy, then I'm sorry, but they have taught you a different gospel from the one that we read of in the Bible. Jesus said, if anyone would deny himself, he must take up his cross and follow me. And in that spirit, Joseph was one who took up his cross and who followed the Lord whom he loved and served. We've said before that there is a pattern in Joseph's life that mirrors that of Jesus. And just like Jesus had to endure suffering for doing the right thing, by standing up, by, as it were, saying no, so we see that in Joseph's story as well. Exaltation and humiliation. And yet, there is the pattern to Joseph's life, from the pit to the palace. God would take Joseph through the experience of life, the difficulties, the hard times, the prison-like experiences, but he would take him from the pit to the palace. Just like he took his own son, as it were, from the depths of despair, from the pit of Calvary, from the cross on Calvary, to the palace of heaven. We ought not to be surprised when we read of Joseph being persecuted and put in prison for doing the right thing. Jesus himself said, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you, as Potiphar's wife did. Potiphar's wife uttered evil against Joseph. Rejoice and be glad, Joseph, because your reward is great in heaven. See, Joseph, as a young man, could well have had many questions as he was in that prison cell. Is it worth it? What have I done to deserve this? But because Joseph was a young man who loved God, who was faithful to God, and wanted to honor God, and wanted to protect his testimony, and wanted to honor the trust that Potiphar had placed on him, that is the reason why even in the trials, the Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. Whatever trials we may go through in our lives, the takeaway from today is this: the Lord is with us. We simply cannot imagine what must have been going through Joseph's mind. He'd already been thrown in the pit. He'd listened to his brother's conversations about killing him. He'd been sold into Egypt by a group of foreign travelers. They'd taken him to the market. And then he'd been as a result of Potiphar's wife's lies, thrown into prison. Just think what was going through the mind of this young man. Joseph was faithful to God. And put simply, it's because Joseph was faithful to God, God was faithful to him. Life is tough. Hear this. But God is faithful. That's the subtext. That's the takeaway from Genesis 39. This indecent proposal that came to Joseph, as Joseph resisted it and said no, for sure, he was put in prison, but God was with him, and God would take him from the pit to the prison and to, ultimately, the palace. Be encouraged and join me next week in Teaching Truth.